Welcome back, everyone. This is part 2 of today's episode of News Breaking News. Today is the 28th day of the 6th month of the first year of Trumptopia, otherwise known as 2017. I'm your crazy mad scientist, transcendental Zen Buddhist weirdo host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Let's get back to the news. What news is the fake news? I was just kind of tapering off, giving shout-out props to Don Lemon and I think it's Jim Acosta. I might have gotten their names wrong. Sorry about that. All statements aside about the level of corruption in media, there does seem to be some people that sometimes take a stand and say, hey, what's the truth? What's going on? For those who didn't catch it, there was a period of interesting tension in the White House press conference room where increasingly over the last several weeks and or months, the number of briefings that were off camera by request of the White House that the media just sort of conceded out of not wanting to piss off anybody in the administration, they would turn off the cameras. At other times, and it was just audio recordings. At other times, they'd turn off the audio. And obviously, it's clear that there are media interactions where the president and other members of his cabinet or his administration just don't respond to the reporters' questions. And this whole fake news, real news question is, in my humble opinion, one of those brilliant examples of mixing facts with exaggeration with flat-out lies. Okay? As much as, yes, many major outlets are owned by either a small consortium of holding companies that are then owned by a small handful of the same people, we can't go overboard and believe that 100% of everything that comes out of everybody's mouth on all news agencies is 100% fake. If that were true, we'd be in a much scarier place and time right now, I think. But so there's still people out there trying to say, hey, what the fuck? Like these two guys on CNN were like, hey, what the fuck? And I know CNN just took a big hit to their credibility. And Fox is really whipping them for it with the secret videotape. I don't even have notes about this because I just saw the clips of the secret videotape. There was a CNN producer, reportedly a CNN producer, talking unwittingly to a quote-unquote friend that was also secretly tape recording him to sell to Fox News. And is that real or is that fake? Who knows, man? It seems real. And for all the talk about fake news, it seems fascinating to me that the White House et al. Often rely on news articles with very little credibility from the alt-right media platforms that, in all honesty, have very little credibility as organizations and have clear and obvious biases in ways that are just, if not bordering on, outright un-American. What was fascinating about this whole camera situation was that for a couple of days there in a row, they were just denied access to turning on camera. And there was this question of, will anyone in the media defy the request? I was really hoping for some sort of, eruptive, disruptive moment at a gaggle or a press conference or a thing where they were asked to turn off cameras, and that somebody was bold enough to turn one on and roll tape. I forget which talking head, but some talking head said on a panel discussion on one of the channels I was flipping through that whoever did that would get amazing footage of a brilliant, scoop of a moment. I think quite revealingly, the next day, Sean Spicer did not present the briefing. It was Ms. Huckabee Sanders. No relation to either, question mark? Or is she related to one, or is she related to both Huckabee and Sanders? But she presented it, and she's always sort of better at the job than Spicer is. And like with the police situation thing, I send my compassion and love and forgiveness and prayers and healing energy to them, because they're getting paid to spin for this madman in office, and that's got to be traumatic. So, other interesting, crazy news. This Muslim ban, this partial victory or vindication that's being celebrated on the right, and this partial, what would be the appropriate complementary term? This vindication, this partial vindication that's being celebrated on the left about the Muslim ban. That, to me, that whole thing has stank of red herring and distraction from the beginning. And here's why. It pissed everybody off. It riled up the sort of xenophobic base, because there's no denying that. The people that Trump's alt-right sort of leanings riles up, people who are xenophobic, hands down, and who are unjustly xenophobic because they themselves are descendants of foreigners. The only true Americans that were born here, all the Native Americans that we subjugated. And I take partial responsibility to that, because my nation of origin, that I ultimately origin from, family-wise, I've never been there, was quite oppressive to indigenous peoples as well. It was the trending thing back in the day. But this Muslim ban was designed to create division. This Muslim ban was designed to give a rallying point for those, for whatever their personal reasons, spiritually and emotionally and intellectually, have chosen to spew nothing but hate at their fellow human beings who happen to be Muslim. And I know that's a prickly subject. I see that the Muslim hate indoctrination is quite powerful out there in the world, because there's a lot of Christians spewing a lot of hate in a very un-Christian-like fashion, talking about how Islam is a religion of violence and death and crazy things like that, with zero acknowledgement of the 2,000-year history of oppression, raping, pillaging, destruction, murder, oppression, torture, and general wickedness that Christianity, perpetrated on the world in its advancement of, propagating Christianity. The Muslim ban is about that ideological divide. Okay? And in and of itself, as originally presented, was really neither a ban, not a ban that he pretended that Mr. Trump, the very first time that Donald Trump talked about this idea, he said full and complete ban on any Muslim coming from anywhere, okay? So that's the idea, that's the seed that he planted, the idea of hate, which is incredibly unconstitutional and un-American. This is a melting pot country. Whether you think that it is so for virtuous reasons or nefarious reasons, that question is debatable. But from its inception, this country has absorbed people from other places and utilized them in various fashions. Why do you think we had a slave trade? It wasn't just because it was fashionable. It was because we needed the labor. I say we because we all, whether we were here or not at the time, had to take ownership of that past if we're going to claim to love being a part of this country. Which I do. All right? And so I say, even as a foreigner with no direct relations and with an ancestry split right down the middle on both sides of oppressive nation, which was Spain, and people oppressed, which is Mexico. This body was born in Mexico, and this, I have to own all of that craziness. My point is, though, as I kind of ramble around in a crazy spiral of spiraling spirals, is that this ban, the idea as presented, was not what was enacted in terms of this bit of really borderline unconstitutional law, and it had one of its three teeth removed when it went through that legislative process early on and was almost barred, and then it was reinstated because they redrafted it. And there's a whole other ironic level to it. It was a short-term temporary ban, okay, of select nations, which I don't know how this hits Trump supporters. I haven't heard many Trump supporters comment on this, but those nations were not selected by Trump people. They were selected by the Obama administration for reasons that the Trump administration doesn't even acknowledge, rationalize, has nothing to do with his rationale as presented. And what's, as of the most recent turn of events around this legislation, the Supreme Court has now decided to take it on as something that it will hear the arguments of in October. By the date that they listen to it, the temporary period of the ban will have lapsed twice. Let that sink in for a moment. This was a fake bullshit ban. Okay? Its stated rationale, which was to give the Trump administration time to think through its immigration policy, specifically around... They're not thinking through anything, are they? There's no evidence. If they were, you'd think they'd be touting it. They haven't developed any... No. And the original period, as proposed, based on the original date of the release of the original ban, would have lapsed by now. So in theory, they could have figured out what was needed figuring out. Someone reposted a brilliant quote about it. Oh, I don't have it up. I had it up earlier, and I rebooted my machine and failed to have it up. But I'll reference it in another episode, I'm sure. It's quite funny, and I'm sure you can find it yourself on the internet. But somebody's quoted as saying, exactly that, something about the math. The math doesn't make sense. They were going to figure out what needs to get done in that, 190 days or 100 days or 90 days plus another 90 days. I forget what it was, but there was a short-term period. Now, yes, obviously, if the ban had been accepted and had been executed without a hitch, and there'd been no backlash, and there'd been no protest movement, their goal was probably to extend in perpetuity, multiple times over, that ban, in order to, keep being able to say that Trump kept that promise, even though on its face, it's not a fulfillment of that promise at all. Because those select countries are countries we have positive ties with, even if we're not full-on, allies. And as it stands now, with the nuanced decision to only partially enact, it's not really a victory, because its partial enactment lets in lots of people. Okay, so all this hoop hurrah on the right about Trump being vindicated or not, it's pure spin. They have neither shown the American public that they're figuring out what to do about. They just keep saying extreme vetting and Muslim ban over and over again. In other words, like it, stoking xenophobia and a backlash anger about xenophobia, which is just a polemic to get distracted by, et cetera, et cetera. I think I've made my point on that, right? In a related area, two things that... Actually, let me go back to this other thing. This other thing is the same thing. Okay, sorry. I'm getting too excited here and worked up. I guess I shouldn't leave the Muslim ban issue without appropriately sending gratitude and thanks and applause and support, much love and positive energy to everyone who stood in support of, and in support of the people affected by this ban and injured by this ban, because the messaging there was hate. The President of America has shattered the normal boundary of how much hate the President can express on the public stage of the world. And we really sort of have to acknowledge that. And so my heart goes out to people who were offended by this or were impacted by this in a logistical way, because many people were, especially that first day. The original ban was set forth without any guidance from the federal government to the agencies required to hold up the ban. And of course, all the people caught up in the argumentation, which is a waste of time. Pure ego trap. But they're experiencing trauma about that, right? And that's sort of something that does not get talked about or addressed as often as it should be. Okay, so moving on. In other news, a couple of things that are kind of quite wonderful, flip-floppy. They should go into the category of before and after. How magically Trump can just change his position on something before and after enough of a timeline horizon has passed. Before the election, before now, until he just flip-flopped, President Donald Trump has asserted in many different ways and in many different, phrasings that Russia, Putin himself, had nothing to do with any kind of activities that would be considered hacking or interfering with the election. Now, there's a whole other before there, which is funny. Before the Russia story really kind of came into its own in the media, Trump was saying the election was rigged. Election's rigged, election's rigged, election's rigged. I have a theory about that. I think that that the two front runners, Clinton and Trump, given that they were friends, possibly cousins according to one conspiracy theory, but definitely people who had a financial relationship, i.e. Trump gave them and the Clinton's foundation's money, and the Clintons, I think it's been reported and vetted that they would hold functions with Trump at Trump properties, meaning they gave him money, right? I could be wrong about that, though. I'll admit that. I'm totally pulling that out of hazy memory. But okay, setting aside all those things that might be dodgy, they clearly, it is my understanding historically and in a review of the facts now with hindsight, had a positive, generally, friendly relationship before the election. And then he was, she's a puppet. Remember? She was a puppet. My theory goes that nobody gets to be the forerunner of either party without getting sort of vetted and coerced and indoctrinated and blessed and sort of, entangled into the same or by the same forces or powers that be that are above and beyond the public's ability to find out, right? There are those that work in secrecy because they have the money to spend to stay out of the public eye. And yeah, Russia's politics are probably caught up in the same web. And that whatever this whole Russia thing as ruse, because I don't deny that it is. I think some of the facts are real, like the meetings actually happened, and the money trail is really the money trail. And like I pointed out as nuance before, Trump and his team probably didn't collude about the hackings because they probably didn't have the technical knowledge or wherewithal, and the hackings were about probing and finding out information that those guys probably didn't have any information on. How to get into the systems is not something that the Trump team was probably helping them with very much. But they were coordinating on other fronts, I'm sure, in some way. And I wouldn't be surprised that if this investigation got really real and dug really deep, because Trump himself has said this, why aren't the Clintons being investigated? Because they have financial ties to Russia. Now, that's either an artful exaggeration or lie, because it is verifiable that this president lies. But he also tells the truth, and that's the maddening thing. It's what keeps his followers blindly following him, and it's what keeps his opposers, people who oppose him, just riled up in all this kinds of distracting and energy-sucking anger. The two things that really that follow this pattern of before and after. Russia didn't interfere, did not interfere, did not interfere. They got nothing to do with it. Might as well have been a fat guy in his mommy's basement. Suddenly, now that it can serve a purpose, oh yeah, Russia did. I admit it. They did something. But it was Obama's fault that they didn't do anything about blah, 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 blah. Blame Obama, blame Obama, blame Obama. Okay? So it's fascinating that he's finally admitting that, after disparaging the intelligence agency for months and months and months, arguably almost a year and a half, 2 years now, he's now conceding that they have something going and using it in his purpose for some other kind of misdirection. All of these points, and there'll be more to discuss, stink of someone who's trying to make sure that, and only he knows what this is, that something that's sort of mixed in with all his other business doesn't get unearthed. And it may have nothing to do with Russia. It may have everything to do with Russia. Who knows? But there's something going on, right? He makes, but the fascinating pattern is someone who's openly friendly. There's we've already called it a bromance. Many people throughout the spectrum of reporting have said this very curious bromance between him and Putin. So now all of a sudden the intel is real and valid, and yet there's zero comment on what this new administration is going to do to retaliate or punish or set a firm line. In fact, he's never said a negative word about Putin. He's only ever praised him in an absurd, borderline un-American way, and the rationale being, let's have a good relationship with Russia to try to fix problems. And yet, simultaneously, when it comes to Syria, he's sort of, sending a stern message, or at least his some of his stooges, some of his mouthpieces are trying to spin it that way. Because not only did he flip-flopped on Russia evidence, not because there's no evidence, we haven't been given any evidence yet. We've just been given the assurance that this investigation needs to happen. And that's an important distinction to be made. They're not going to show us the evidence that they are talking around yet, because they got to finish the investigation and draw conclusions. Duh. But out of the blue, I think a day and a half ago now also, despite having disparaged our intelligence agencies and their capacities and their accuracy and their validity, suddenly a strange memo out of the White House saying that intelligence has come in on Syria, claiming that preparations for new chemical weapons manufacturing are going on, and then, ending this memo from the president, or from the White House rather, not in the president's own writing. I don't think he signed it. I didn't get to see the memo myself, but with a basic, rattling of the saber, threatening statement against Syria. Now, it can't be ignored that Syria has a relationship, can be in a way considered a proxy for Russia. Connect all those dots. Connect all those dots. Here's what I think is going on. Brace yourselves. World War III has already been frameworked. I mean, they've been rehearsing in Syria and what's that neighboring country that we don't talk about? Yemen? They've been rehearsing and setting it up and, laying out the framework, the groundwork, and the distraction, the division tactics on the other end of the spectrum to keep us sort of fed up and frustrated and arguing about other things. In order to fabricate the consent on the pro-war side and the disorganization of opposition on the anti-war side to go ahead and just steam right into World War III. As if we shouldn't be calling Syria World War III already. If we looked at a breakdown of all the countries in that, it sounds like, to me it looks like enough countries to call this tragic human butchering that's going on in Syria for the last 7 years World War III. But what they want is something that they can really market to us as World War III. In order for that to fly, they got to have a lot of conflict and anger and confusion and mistrust and perceived threats. So this pro-Putin president of ours here in Trumptopia very surreptitiously and out of the blue and for the first time ever, although not very directly, send out a statement, a message, that Putin himself, from what I understand, from what I've seen in the reporting, responded to saying, hey, that's a provocation, bro. So that's bizarre. All of that's bizarre. And the only piece I can think of to add to this puzzle that helps sort of make it all make sense is that it's a game of opposition upon opposition upon opposition, and that the long-term trajectory is an increase in sales to all parties involved of the machines of war manufactured by the international global industrial military complex. Duh. This shouldn't be shocking. Plenty of people stood up and spoke out against this very thing at the end of World War I, the end of World War II. The war profiteers have a really long view on their project because more is never enough. And they've got plenty to float around waiting for more to be more. To be able to have access to more. And to them, more is exponentially growing profits from the manufacture and sale of machines that can only be described as tools for to be used for the purposes of organized murder. Whether it's domestic organized murder or international organized murder. That's what they sell. That's what they create massively sophisticated and very subtle marketing campaigns about. And that's what they peddle in politics. And so here we are, a nation, a planet, gripped in ideological conflict and on the brink of international war, and everyone's running around asking themselves and each other in a frantic way, what can we do to stop this? Or kind of more ridiculously, why are the leaders of the world allowing this to happen? The leaders of the world are impotent in the face of global conflict, in whatever form it arises, whether North Korea triggers something over there and then the rest of the world gets dragged into it, or the war on terror triggers something in the Middle East, in any of the hotbeds there, and the rest of the world gets dragged into it. The leaders of the world appear impotent, or to us, the peons, would seem impotent. And that impotence is nothing new. What can be done about it? Well, it is this commentator's humble opinion that spewing hate at world leaders, at other countries, at other patriots within our own countries, at each other, at ourselves, at even at the gun industry, etc., etc., etc. If we're spewing hate, then we're just allowing ourselves to be part of the problem. And as crazy and as out there and as hippie and as new age woo-woo as it sounds, that healing is the antidote to self-destruction. And that to heal, we have to begin at an individual level with a long-term intent to elevate that healing power to a global level. And we got to stop we got to stop falling for the traps that the manipulators and the spin doctors and the politicians lay out for us, all in service of the oppressor. And we have to liberate our own minds first. Before we can heal ourselves, we have to abandon all the ideological constructs in our minds that we cling to, that we believe in, that we invest with power, that prevent us from healing ourselves. Before we can negotiate with each other as Americans, or as Californians, or as Texans, or as whatever we are, in whatever community we are, before we can engage in that network of networks, because ultimately the whole planet is interconnected and interdependent, we have to heal ourselves and each other. And that's the news that isn't being talked about. And it's a shame to me, in a world that has lived in the shadow of Christ's living example. How do you think he turned water into wine, folks? How do you think he healed Lazarus? Divine power? Okay, let's go with that. Let's run with that. Let's lock that in. Divine power. All right. What else did he tell us to contemplate? That it was our personal moral responsibility to take care of others, to follow in his footsteps. It's a theme right now, and it's going to go. It's a theme in at every issue. Healthcare. What did Jesus say? What did Jesus do? He healed people for free. He didn't charge them money and profiteer on them. He did not send us off to build hospitals in his name. He did not send us off to build churches in his name. He sent us off to heal ourselves and each other. To observe the teachings from God that say, be still and know. What do you think being still is? How does one achieve being still in the most efficient and meaningful way? It sure as hell isn't waging war against some other group of human beings that believe in a slightly different version of the same nonsense, the same idea. Right? Our leadership here in America, and in other countries too, claims to be predominantly Christian in nature, and yet denies, completely ignores, completely radically marginalizes the transcendental meditative teachings that can be found in the Christian Bible. Christ himself says, thy body is an eye. If thine eye be singular, then thy body be made of light. That sounds an awful lot to me like your body's connected to other energies, and if you can learn how to access those other energies, your body will become divine energy. Crazy. Breaking news. Jesus might have been a transcendentalist, meditator, and healer, and light worker, and enlightened one. In the way that the mystics that predate Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad and Abraham and Mithra and everybody else that we are cognizant of in the contemporary sense, that lived a life that we describe as the prophet's life, they said that achieving that is your natural, organic-born birthright. The mind-bogglingly scary news is that, yes, our governments, our corporations, and our religious institutions are painting us into a corner which will render us, or put us, rather, in a position of perceiving a global war as seemingly impossible to avoid, as inevitable, as a necessary evil. Where have we heard that before? And the truth is, that's not necessary. That's not necessary at all. If we as individuals can choose to abandon our adherence to the lies that they've conditioned us with, and we can liberate our minds, that's all meditation is. Whether you meditate in the Christian tradition, because believe it or not, do your research, my fellow Christians out there, deep way down, and I've said it before, deep down behind the bullshit, there's traditions of Christian meditation. Just like there are traditions of Jewish meditation, and Islamic meditation, and obviously Buddhist meditation. And deep down, there's evidence for meditation with the supplemental help of natural, organic, herbs and plants that might be considered medicinal in nature. I know that's shocking news to some people, but the evidence is there. There's a great documentary that indicates that the Jewish and therefore the Christian tradition, because Christ was a Jew and not a Christian, that the Jewish tradition very well might have a forgotten or abandoned or occulted, like secreted away, sort of, we're not going to let people know about this anymore, tradition of the consumption of a tea made from mushrooms that may or may not have been either psilocybin or, the traditional mushroom that manufactures psilocybin, because that's the name of the compound, right? Not the name of the mushroom itself. Or is it also the name of the mushroom itself? Is sort of its phyllis? I don't remember right now. But and it's been years since I've participated in that particular ritual. But it's there. If you do the research, you'll find that every culture, regardless of its origin, deep in its roots, deep back when we were hunter-gatherers and much more spiritual people, have tradition. We all had traditions of meditating with the enhancement of natural-born plants. That's crazy news, right? Boom, 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 boom. All my segments come full circle somehow. So yeah, okay, my time is running out. I got about 6 minutes left. We are in an era of very confusing news, folks. And I don't claim to have authoritative sources of any kind. I'm giving you my opinion and my rational thinking and my spiritual thinking on what is presented to us in a sort of general spray of the media available to us. And yes, there are extremes in every direction. There are extreme media outlets to the left and to the right and, in the middle of every type. And the extremism is something that needs to be avoided and acknowledged and called out and held accountable. And it's exhausting because I'm not saying that I'm alone in doing this, and I'm not saying that I'm somehow doing this better than others. But facts can be fact checked, and lies and false theories can be debunked. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of coordination and trust. So thanks for tuning in. As always, I encourage you, your comments, your questions, your love, your hate, either my Gmail account or directly on the YouTube videos or on the Sprecher account or on my Facebook or on my Instagram. I'm probably going to take the next day or two off from podcasts, but that I haven't fully committed to that decision yet. But I have other projects that I want to focus on, including my science fiction, my transcendental science fiction action adventure spoof parody of, spy thrillers / political intrigue drama entertainment, which is pure fiction. But I think I'm going to focus on that for a few days. But with 4 minutes and 20 seconds left to go at the tone, bing! I just want to take a moment to encourage you to always question everything. To question my assertions. To question the news that you watch. To questions, and not just question it in a dismissive way, because that's meaningless, ultimately. To question it in a genuinely patient, inquisitive, thoughtful way in order to render the most sophisticated and nuanced opinion you can about what's going on. There really is something crazy and nefarious going on in the world, folks, and we may not have the most concise theory about it yet. And the media isn't helping. Because you'll notice, regardless of where in the spectrum of good or bad you think any particular media channel lands, very few media outlets are carrying spiritual content that is non-partisan, non-secular, and about healing, and about enlightenment, and about compassion, and about sharing, and about transcending our problems through global communion with the divine thing, whatever that is. Why is that? Well, to some degree, because we do live in a sort of secular world, and there's some validity to that. But I think also secularism might be part of the mechanism of the oppressor that gets us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So there's a lot of angles on this, and there's more to be discussed, and I humbly implore any local listeners that find this little project interesting to contact me. It doesn't have to be local, actually. I'm totally willing and interested in working with people from anywhere on the globe that want a Skype call, etc., to have a conversation in any of these segments, or that have, that want... this isn't about just my voice. So hit me up. Let me know you're interested, and we'll schedule something. Southern California locals willing to commute to do it in person, step to the front of the line, please. And as goofy and as irregular as the shows have been, I honestly have the intent, once there's a team willing to work free for a little bit in front, and we're going to lock this down into a place of professionalism and interest and earns us income. Because if there's any good side to life, free market economy, is that we can become our own job creators, unless they're full of shit, right? Thanks for listening. May peace, love, and grooviness be with you. And don't forget, hold your favorite news outlet accountable. Hold your government representatives accountable. Because regardless of where you think you are on the ideological spectrum, the truth is a cloudy mess, and the lies are a cloudy mess, and those two cloudy messes are a clusterfuck of fully mush-mosh together right now. And it is our responsibility as members of this great community called the American Experiment to hold those who are leading us astray accountable. Not through violence and not through ideological nonsense, but by saying, hey, you're lying. All right, my wrap-up was wonky short, and I still have 20 seconds left to go. Thanks, man and woman and everybody who's listening. Peace out.